Hi everyone, my name is Andy Wokley. I'm the Product Marketing Manager at Blackbaud for our peer-to-peer solutions and your host today for our final session of today's Peer-to-Peer World Virtual Conference, turning your peer-to-peer fundraising data into insights. Much like most of our peer-to-peer events, we've had a lot of people join in the last few seconds, and I want to let you all know that this session is going to be recorded so that for those of you that want to go back and listen in on something that really caught your attention and want to have a refresh, or if you want to share that information with some other folks in your organization or peers who might find the information really valuable, go ahead and share that information. The links will be available on the peertopeerworld.com website in a day or two. Go check those out and share some really great content. Really excited today to finish up our session with data. We've talked a lot about mobile, we've talked about the effect of communities, we've talked about new ways to do peer-to-peer fundraising. In each of those sessions, the presenters have woven in some elements of data analysis that help them make decisions along the way. And so now when we hear from Lynn and Bill Jacobs from Analytical One, we're going to learn more about how data can really help you drive some of the directions of your campaign and the decisions that you make along the way. I'm really fond of saying, data that's not actionable is just trivia. And I think we'll see today in this session that there are some really crucial things that you can look at in your data to help drive some decisions. I'm sure there'll be a lot of tweetable moments, so join us on Twitter. The hashtag is P2P World. We've had some lively conversation already, and we'd love for you to join the conversation and pose questions to Lynn and Bill using the Q&A feature on the console that you're using today to view the slides. We'll save those for the end, and I'll pose those to Bill and Lynn at the conclusion of their presentation. So without further ado, take it away.
All right, thank you. I'm Bill Jacobs. First, I wanted to give a shout out. If you've been on all day listening to these, God bless you for staying tuned for the analytics section. But I also wanted to say thank you to all the different hosts of this event. And as was just mentioned, these presentations are going to be available for you to look at later. I would just highly suggest you check out these websites and see more about what these companies do in the P2P space. Moving to the next slide, Lynn. Again, I'm Bill Jacobs. I'm the managing partner of Analytical Ones. And Lynn and I will be presenting this portion of the last section of this conference today, so we're happy to do that. Lynn and I are both donor behavior scientists, and that's a real fancy term for people that use both quantitative and qualitative data to understand why donors do what they do. And as was just mentioned, we never want to create data just for data's sake. We want to glean insights so that we can help the fundraising so you can raise more revenue for your organizations. Lynn, let's go ahead on the next slide. And one of the overall objectives that we all have is to raise more money so that we can funnel that towards our organization so that they can fulfill their mission. And really, in our view, there's three overriding strategic areas that you can do to raise more money. The first is being what is called win, and that's all about getting more participants to your event. And that's either brand new participants who are experiencing it for the first time. In addition, also that includes those that you're reactivating, people that may have not participated in the last couple of years. Again, the more people you participate, the likelihood that you're going to raise more money increases as well. The second strategic area is called lift, and that involves two components. One is to get the participants or motivate them to give more, and the second part of that is to increase the number of people supporting their run, ride, or walk. So again, we get a larger body of people that are supporting the participant and raising more money. The final category or strategic area we look at is keep, and those are retention metrics. And that's a very critical, particularly for event fundraising, because typically we see lower retention rates than we do with other types of fundraising. Of course, the best retention always starts with an awesome experience. Nothing can replace that. But in addition to that, we want to understand, is there different ways we can communicate and cultivate these participants over the course of the year that help improve your retention or keep metrics. So what can we learn from data? So again, it's not the data itself. We want to learn from the data to get insights to make marketing and fundraising decisions that generate more revenue. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So on the next slide, one of the things that really there's a lot of data, and no matter what database you're using, if it's the Blackbaud tool or a different tool, sometimes we can be overwhelmed with the amount of data that we're looking at. So really what you want to do is just come up with a few objectives, and I would invite you today to really focus on a win metric, a keep metric, and a lift metric that you can focus on for your organization that can help you. It's going to be probably a little different for each organization, but it's critical that those metrics are looked at event in and event out. And as we know, that a lot of you will be moving to a different organization in 2 years. You want to make these metrics part of the culture so that even if you do transition out, the organization isn't hurt and having to start all over, that there is a history of metrics that are moving forward. You also, we really encourage to visualize the data. A table full of numbers is very difficult to interpret. And lastly, of course, it's not just about the number, but it's the insights that lead to action for raising more money. Here we look at just of those 3 strategic areas, some very common metrics that might be a good place for you to start when you're looking at your own data. Under the win, we have keeping track of how many participants are acquired. And under that new participant retention, the reason that's in win and not in keep is that we know that in the event space, we have a lot of people sign up that never follow through. So we want to keep track of how many of those people that sign up actually do end up doing the event and fundraising. And an important category is also the number of participants we reactivated that were formerly active but are no longer. In the lift category, we want to look at those that create goals and the importance of goals. How many of them are actually achieving that goal? How many of those participants are actually donating themselves, or what we call self-donation? And are they actually fulfilling in that? As well as keeping track of team and individual fundraiser performance. And lastly, we want to look at participant retention, team retention, and fundraiser retention, those people that are supporting the run, walk, or ride participant, or if it's a different type of event, depending on your specific situation. So at this point, I want to transfer it over to Lynn, who's going to go into some of the very specific detail that you can look at in your own data as you move forward to start developing some key performance metrics for your organization.
Great, thanks, Bill. So let's talk first about preparing the data. And we want to kind of talk through some of this just in case you want to do some of this analysis on your own. Everything that we're going to show you today, you can do by basically exporting your data and dumping it into Excel. Some of it takes a little bit more data manipulation than others. So we'll kind of show you some basic metrics, some a little bit more advanced, and of course, you know, it could take us hours to go through the exact detail of how to run this metrics, but we kind of want to get you set up with the data, show you some of the metrics, and then again, if you have problems as you kind of go through this and want to run some of it on your own, give us a call, reach out to us, we can help you a little bit. You know, when we do data analytics, we use analytics software called SPSS. So it gives us a lot more flexibility, and it's a little bit easier to use, but we know the majority of people don't have that. So we kind of want to talk you through how to do this, some of this in Excel. So the first thing you're going to want to do is export out of the system that's kind of managing all of the data. Again, that could be a Blackbaud system, it could be Donor Drive, it could be a number of other systems. But you want to get to where the raw data is stored. And so there's different ways to do that based on, of course, what system you're using. But you'd want to get out at least 3 years of raw data. So if you've been doing the event for 3 or more years, we want to extract at least 3 years worth of that data information so that we can pull that into Excel. Then we're going to kind of clean up the data as well as add additional data fields. And what I mean by this, and I'll show you an example of it, it depends on which system you're using, first of all. Some of the data that we look at, there's a unique account number for each individual. So if that individual comes back year after year, that account number kind of transfers with them so that you can see that they're a recurring participant in your event. There's other systems where they're not creating that kind of a unique account number. So we would recommend that you'd kind of create that. Now that's going to take some time because you're going to have to look at first name, last name, to see if somebody's participated year over year. So it's a little bit more cumbersome, but you can certainly do that in Excel. The other thing is, as we go through this session today, we're going to talk about participant life cycle. And we're going to talk about several different life cycles. But the things that we think are probably the most important as you get started down this road of analytics is to identify new participants and then people that have lapsed. So your new participants, who is new to you this year? Who participated in your event this year that has never participated before? You'll kind of want to pull those people out or make a code for them. So you want to add in Excel, code those people as new so that you can easily identify them. And the other life cycle that we think is important for you is your people that are lapsed. So these are people that perhaps participated in your event in 2015 but did not return for your 2016 event. So you want to kind of, again, code those people so that you can use that information as we kind of go through this today. The other part of kind of that data cleansing is really to remove some of the unnecessary data fields that you're not going to look at, that you're not going to use. Kind of rename some of those data fields so that you understand what that means, and then just kind of scroll through your data and look for anything that seems a little odd. Here's an example of kind of the data fields that we would recommend that you start with. This is what you would want to pull out of your system and then upload into Excel. This is an example on the screen of what that looks like. This was out of a Blackbaud system, and then we pulled out the raw data and threw it into Excel, and you can kind of just see it's got ID numbers, the actual event name, the goal, number of gifts, all of that is here. So we kind of start with everything and then start narrowing down, okay, let's take a look at just only these data fields that we're actually going to use in the analysis. And so we've kind of given you a little list of some of that. So that's just, again, basics of how to get started. Again, we could talk for hours about how you actually manipulate the data to get to each of these graphs. Some of these might be pretty simple for you to get to once you've got that data exported. Others might be a little bit more complicated. Again, we're here to offer assistance as you start to get into this and work with your data. Please reach out to us and chat with us if you want to talk through anything. But let's talk about first participant fundraising and some of the metrics that we want to look at, and then what do we do with those metrics. This first graph, and again, this goes to what Bill talked about visualizing the data. Sometimes it's easier to look at a graph like this as opposed to just raw numbers. And so we always try to put it into something that's a little bit visual. And again, this is all generated through Excel. these charts. So, so this first graph really takes a look at the participants and what their engagement level was with the organization. That green bar, which is showing 41% in 2016, these are people that participated but didn't do anything. They didn't make a gift, they didn't fundraise, they didn't do anything. This specific client, there's not even a registration fee. And so we've got 41% of the people that actually participated in the event did not make a single gift at all. Then you've got that red bar. These are self-donors. So these are people that participated in the event and only made a self-gift. So they, wanted to participate and they wanted to make a gift themselves, and that's all they did. So you've got 27% of the file that did that in 2016. And then the blue bar is our valuable people. These are people that actually fundraised. So, so they could have made a self-gift or not, but they actually got donations from other people. And you can see that for this client, that's 32% of the file. Which, is an improvement over 2015, but look at where they were in 2014. They had 47% of the file actually fundraising. And so when we kind of look at this information, we kind of look at what has been the trend of that organization. And then there's also benchmarks that you can use as an industry-wide for nonprofit organizations. And Blackbaud does produce that on a yearly basis. And so when I was looking at the last year's benchmarks, I think for a walk, it was, Blackbaud was saying on average is about 32% of the people that actually do fundraise. So while this organization is certainly on benchmark with the industry average, we try to say, well, that's great, but in the past, just 2 years ago, we were a lot higher. So, so what did we do 2 years ago that's different than what we're doing today? So again, the importance is to get to those actionable insights, right? We want to look at the data and we want to say, okay, what can I do based on what this data is telling me? How can I improve my program based on what the data is saying? So when we look at this, when we look at the percent of people that are making self-donations, we saw that was, low, that grew over the past year, but we really want to focus on that in the new year because we know that people that make a self-donation, on average, those people raise more money. So we really want to grow that self-donation. We want to grow that, and we want people to really make a self-gift. So that might be something we want to focus on. We also saw that the peer-to-peer fundraising declined dramatically in 2015. So we want to take a look at what is our communication calendar look like? What kind of changes did we make? Do we need to make any improvements to that? Here's just a quick sample or a snapshot of what a communications calendar should look like. And it just really shows you week by week, what's happening, messages are going out, who those messages are going to. Really take a look at, based on what the data is telling you, take a look at your communications calendar and see if are you maybe not communicating enough about that importance of a self-donation. Do you need to add some more emails or communications about why that is so important? So really kind of evaluate your communication strategy based on what the data is telling you. Okay, let's take a look at some metrics based on fundraising goals. So the first graph is showing you what the average goal is for participants. In 2014, on average, the goal that individuals were setting was $257. In 2016, we're seeing that has reduced to $214. That could just well be a change in strategy. It could be that they decided to make that recommendation for an average gift lower based on what they were seeing in the data. Just it's important to look at and think about what has changed in your strategy and your recommendations. The next one shows overall what percent of those participants that set goals are actually achieving that goal. And we can see that that has been a little bit on the decline as well. And so what's interesting is that we had a higher goal in 2014 and more people actually achieving that goal. So as the goal has been lowered, we're seeing less people achieving that goal. So some thoughts about, okay, well now what do we do with that information? Again, take a look at what's been happening. You know, have you changed the recommended goal over the last couple of years in your program? The other thing to think about is, do you have a default goal? Does it, when you have somebody registering, do you have a goal that automatically fills in? And is that $150, $200? And have you tested actually removing that default goal and letting a person set their own goal? A lot of times we see with that default goal that people just leave that and don't change it at all. You know, so do you have better performance rates of better rates of people achieving their goal if we remove that default goal and allow them to, you know, just kind of automatically plug in a goal at first? So things to consider, things to look at and test. Okay, this next chart is a little bit more intense analytics. Again, it can certainly be run out of Excel. Again, it takes a little bit more time and a little bit more processing in order to run this, but we kind of wanted to show you something that you can do. And this is what we're calling an incentive calculator. So a lot of people in their events, they have incentives, right? So if you raise $150, you get a t-shirt. If you raise $500, you get a t-shirt and a water bottle, right? And so what we wanted to do was put some analytics around, are those incentive levels right for your organization? Should they be modified? And how do you figure out how many of those incentives should you order and what's the cost of those incentives, right? And so we kind of put together this calculator. And so on that first line, you see the goal, you see the percentile of 50% and the goal of $50. And what this means is that 50% of the participants raised $50 or more, and 50% raised less, right? So that's our 50 percentile goal. So when we think about, well, okay, well, how many people is that? We know that not everybody fundraises. So at the bottom, we see that we're expecting 3,000 participants in this event, but our data shows us that only 59% of those participants actually fundraise or make a self-donation, right? So then when we calculate that, we're talking about 885 people that will reach that goal, okay? And then we start to say, okay, well, if we wanted to offer these people an incentive, because we've got 50% of the file that's not even reaching that goal, right? So if we wanted to say, let's start our first incentive level at $50, you know, let's say, okay, well, what kind of investment do we want to make in an incentive? And if we say, you know, let's say that's 5%. You know, so if somebody's raising $50, 5% of that value is $2.50. And that says, okay, well, we're going to invest 5% of the goal, or 5% of the donor's value or the participant's value on an incentive. So what can we get for $2.50 per person? And then if we do that, what's that going to cost us? So it's that $2.50 times 885 people, and then you get your total incentive cost for that level. And then you can see how we kind of break that out. So we've got different percentiles if we're looking at 75%, the 99%, and it kind of allows us to say, okay, if you're going to offer incentives, here's some rounded out values that might make sense. You know, $50, $150, 500,000, 4,000, and then 10,000. And then you can start to see if you've got somebody raising 10,000 and we want to stick with that 5% value, that's $500 per person of an investment in an incentive. So again, a little bit more advanced analytics, but this is something that we can get to help you kind of make some decisions around your incentives if you guys are doing an incentive program. And again, just some kind of actions that once you kind of get this data in line, look at it, again, you can use it to really establish your incentive levels. You can, based on your budget for spending, you can determine the appropriate amount that you want to spend for each level. And then it'll really help you with ordering your products and your incentives so that you're not over-ordering or under-ordering. Okay. Okay, let's talk a little bit now about the life cycles. And we touched on this a little bit earlier, but we want to kind of go a little bit more in depth into this. And this is just another way to look at your data. And this is something that we do all the time, whether it's peer-to-peer fundraising data or major donor gifts or direct mail. We always look at things by life cycle. So let's start in this blue box. This is your new participants. So these are, right, these people that are the first time, it's their first event, they've never participated in an event before. So you've got your kind of new participants, you know, those are important to look at and communicate with. Then your next level is your second event. These are people that were participated in the previous year. So they participated in 2015 and they're coming back in 2016 for their second event. Above that, you have your loyal participants. So these are people that have already participated in the previous 2 years. They're now in their third year. These people are very loyal and engaged with your organization. These people are very important to your organization. And if you're not looking at them and communicating with them in a special way, you really should think about doing that. Because again, they've been with you for 3 years. You know, they're loyal to you. They're probably raising a lot of money for your organization. And so it's a really important group of participants. And then going down to the orange, you've got your reactivated. So these are people that were lapsed for whatever reason. So they came and they participated, let's say, in 2014. They did not participate in 2015 for whatever reason, but they came back in 2016. You were able to reactivate them and re-engage these participants in your event. So they're important people to look at as well. And then you've got your lapsed and your extended lapsed. So your lapsed people, they participated, say, in 2014, but they did not come back in 2015. They're lapsed. You've got extended lapsed that haven't participated in the past 2 years. So just another way to look at, you know, it's going to be a lot easier to target those lapsed donors as opposed to those extended lapsed. These people haven't been engaged with your organization for 2 years. So there, you know, there might be a reason it's going to be a little bit more challenging to re-engage them. So we kind of break it out between lapsed and extended lapsed. So when we look at by life cycle, what kind of metrics can we look at to help drive some of our strategies, right? So we talked about the new participants acquired. And we can see that for this organization, they've a little bit on the decline. So in 2016, they acquired the least amount of new participants than they have over the last couple of years. So, you know, that's a 17% drop from the previous year. So something's going on. They're not investing in time or resources to acquire new participants. They're kind of relying on the people that have been with them probably in the past. And so this is an area of opportunity for them to really say, okay, what can we do to improve our new donor, our new participants to the organization? How do we attract new people to this event? And then when we want to say, okay, these new people that we've attracted, how well are we doing with retaining them? So when we look at that first number, that 16.6% in 2014, what this is saying is of the new people that we acquired in 2013, what percentage of those people did we retain in 2014? And we're saying we retained 16.6% of those new people. Well, you can see that we've declined over the last couple of years with retention of new participants. So not only are we acquiring fewer new people, we're retaining less of them. And so we're not doing a very good job here of keeping these new people that we've brought into our event. And something is going on. We're not spending enough time with them. We're not making them feel important. But we really need to spend some time and focus on these new participants in order to retain them, because we're really struggling here with this event. And then let's look at a couple of others. So beyond the new, we talked about that kind of reactivation of lapsed donors. And that first graph is kind of showing you some metrics around that. So when we look at how well are we doing with reactivating lapsed donors, we're seeing that in 2016, we were able to reactivate 5.1% of these lapsed donors. Well, that's, again, lower than the previous 2 years. So again, we're not spending enough time focusing on some of these lapsed donors and bringing them back into our event and to engage them. The other metric we want to look at is the multi-year donors. Remember, we talked about these, or the multi-year participants. We've talked about these participants as being really important to your organization because they've been with you for the last 2 years. They're on their 3rd year of participating. They're really important, and we want to make sure that the number of those participants is growing year over year. And we do see that we're seeing some increases there for this organization. We're seeing that we're getting more and more multi-year participants coming back, which is great. So we do want to see that growth. So that is good news. But as we saw, we're having some troubles with our new participants, retaining those participants, and then reactivating them once they're lapsed. So here's, again, a little bit more advanced analytics. And so it's taking that life cycle that we've been talking about and then adding in one more data element. And we're looking at, we're calling it a lifetime value, but it's their I guess you would say their event value, right? It's what's that participant worth to your organization in the money that they gave and the money that they raised. And so we just wanted to look at what do the numbers look like of participants when we add these two elements together. And this is really what's going to start to drive some of our communication strategies when we get down to really understanding who are these people. So let's take a look at two things. Let's take a look at our new donors, okay? And so we can see that for our 2016 event, we had 724 new donors that didn't do a thing. They did not make a donation. They did not raise any money. You know, they had a zero value to us. And again, this is an event where there's no registration fee. And so they really are worth zero. Not that that's bad. They participated. Maybe if they had a good time, they'll come back next year and maybe they'll make a gift or fundraise. But it's not really, you know, we're not going to spend too much time. We're certainly going to communicate to these people. But when we start to look at, you know, this $1,000 segment, we now can see we have 7 people that were brand new. It was their first event, and they contributed $1,000 or more to the organization. These people are really important, right? We want to make sure that they return next year and that they had a really good experience and that they're going to continue to be engaged. So now we're getting down to 7 people. That's a realistic number. I can start to call these 7 people. Let's take a look at our just lapsed as well. And And we can start to see, you know, we've got a lot of lapsed people. They've, you know, these are not your extended lapse. These are just lapsed. They missed one event. So they participated in 2014 or 2015. They've missed 2016. And we want to say, okay, how can we focus on these people for 2017? And we start to see, okay, we've got, you know, almost 700 people that, again, the last time they were engaged with us, they didn't do anything. But then when we start to look at the $1,000 plus, we're seeing 45 people. And again, you know, we start to say 45 people, that's a manageable number. I can start to call these people. And you can start to have different strategies for your different life cycles based on their value to your organization. And I just want to show you what that looks like in the data. And so again, this is an Excel. This is everything that we've been talking about. We've exported everything into Excel. We've cleaned it up. We've, you know, changed the names of some of the fields. And then what we did in the green is we've created these categories. So we created the life cycle category and the value category. And that way we can start to work this data and sort. So we talked about that we wanted to focus on, say, our $1,000 lapsed people. So in this document, we want to select our $1,000 lapsed people, and we start to see the names of those 45 donors that we talked about. And we've got their names and their addresses and their phone numbers right here. We can start working down this list and calling these people and being like, gosh, we noticed you missed our event last year. You know, we'd like to know why, and start to really engage these lapsed donors. So it allows you to really segment your communication strategy. Okay. Okay, and so just again, summary for some actionable insights. We talked about that we're seeing that new participation for this client was on the decline. The actual retention rate of those new participants has been declining as well. So what kind of strategies can we implement to start to turn those metrics around, right? So things like consider a survey for maybe it's just to new donors or new participants, and start to ask them if they enjoyed the event. What would they have changed? Would they come back, right? Get their input, start to engage with these people. Maybe they need a special discount to come back if you have a registration fee. Something to think about. All of your new participants, you know, you can communicate with them and send them some messaging that's saying that we're glad you joined us for the first time. We want you to come back next year. We're offering you a 10% discount on your registration fee. And then we talked about how to customize some of that communication strategy based on their life cycle as well as their value. The other thing I would encourage you to think about is really an integrated communication strategy where you're not just communicating via email. I know that everything is done online, all of the registration is probably done online for you, but we are seeing some clients start to do some direct mail to these people and starting to see some really big improvements in retention rates and reactivation rates just by doing some postcard mailings or some phone calls. So think about some other things that you can do beyond just kind of the email communication stream. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the retention, right? So this is our keep. So we want to talk about how are we doing with overall participant retention. We talked about in the last section new donor retention, but let's talk about overall retention of our organization, of our participants for our event. We can see that, and we broke this out again by value. So we can see we're doing a better job retaining participants that are responsible for giving or raising $1,000 or more to your event. That's not surprising. We would want to see that because these people are way more engaged with your organization. They have a bigger commitment level, and so you should be retaining them at a higher level than, say, your $50 participants, right? But I think what's important to look at is that next metric. So this is basically the revenue lost from these people. So when we look at our $1,000 plus, so we're retaining 77% of these participants, which means we're losing 23% of the participants. Well, that 23% is responsible for $54,000. Now, we're not going to retain 100% of our participants. That's just not realistic. But we can start to see that if we move some of these needles, we're going to start to make some pretty big impacts in our revenue. And so while we think that, it makes sense to start with that $1,000 plus level, what I want to point out is that mid-level, our participants that are contributing or raising $100 to $499. We're only retaining 32% of these people. And so the revenue lost from the people that we're not retaining is greater than any of the other values. So, when we're losing 68% of these people, we're losing a lot of revenue here. And again, while we can't retain everybody, we can start to say, well, what if we went from 32% retention rate up to a 40% retention rate? What is that going to do to our revenue numbers? What is that? How much revenue are we going to start to increase just by focusing on retention? So it allows us to start to see where we can want to, again, spend some additional resources where we can make some big differences in our revenue gains. Again, just some insights. We talked about, not surprising, our higher value participants retain better. We see that there's some potential in this mid-level segment. So let's think about some strategies there on how do we improve that retention. We can focus on some, maybe a postcard mailing, an incentive to return. What can we do to really spend some additional attention on this mid-level segment? Okay, and then the last kind of analytics that I want to show you is some revenue projections. And this is, again, this kind of takes it to the next level. This is some advanced analytics. It can be done out of Excel. If you've got somebody on your team that's good with numbers, maybe your CFO wants to help you put something like this together. But it allows you to start to see, based on your current performance, if all things remain the same, what is our revenue going to look like over the next 3 years? And we start to see that that's our baseline. And we start to see that we're not really going to experience any growth here. We're going to start to see a little bit of a decline or flattening out of our revenue from our event, just because we're not performing very well, right? We saw that we're not acquiring as many new donors, we're not retaining those, or new participants, we're not retaining those participants, so we're going to start to flatten out. But if we start to make some improvements, and you can actually build this out so that you're looking at, well, let's say we just start to improve the number of people that we retain, or the number of people that we reactivate, or the number of people that make a self-gift. We can start to project out what is that going to look like, and how do we grow with our events over the next couple of years. And then this is really good for helping you set your budgets as you move into the future. I know that being in the nonprofit side for many years, sometimes you've got boards, CEOs just say, well, I want you to grow your event by 10% next year. And this will allow you to say, okay, well, if we need a 10% growth, what do we need to do? How many new participants do we need to bring on this year? How many new participants do we need to retain? You can start to really see the numbers behind what you need to do in order to get to that growth. So that is it. I wanted to open it up to questions. I think we've got some time, about 10 minutes or so, for some questions. Bill, did you have anything else you wanted to add before we jumped into questions?
No, let's get to the questions.
Excellent.
Sounds good. The first one is one that we get a lot whenever we talk about analytics and data. I always get a kick out of it. It starts out, I don't like math. What do you recommend for someone like me to get into the data evaluation and analytics part?
Yeah, that's common. Well, I mean, I guess as a partner in Analytical Ones, the answer that I would say to that is you could hire us to do it, and it's really not as expensive as you might think. You know, we have standard product that we offer for peer-to-peer fundraising, and if you've participated in this conference, look for an email from us in the next couple of weeks where we'll offer you a special rate on that analytics. You know, again, it's not as expensive as you might think, but if you don't have the time, if you don't have the wherewithal, you know, you can certainly kind of farm that out to do that. Bill, do you have any other thoughts on what they can do themselves?
There's the opportunity cost is, as we showed, part of our standard reporting includes that Excel file that identifies those donors that you need to talk to that have contributed $1,000 or more to your organization in the past. You get a couple of those to convert back to active. Your ROI on the analysis is going to be a very quick payoff for you.
That's a great point. I think several of the graphs you illustrated and the data points that you were able to share with us today suggest that there's a lot of money that's left on the table or not running in your race from year to year, and that with some pretty straightforward outreach to them, you can recover that and really activate those people. So time and money well spent to invest in the tools to let you know who those people are. It's a great point. There was actually a little bit of a lively debate early on in your conversation about fundraising goals. And I wonder if we can kind of revisit that topic a little bit and explore it a little bit more. Maybe not setting a default goal versus maybe setting higher goals, or looking at your data to identify places where a default goal might lie. All those things were kind of discussed in some of the threads that were going on. I wonder if you could just speak a little bit more to that topic, since there were so many people interested in it.
Yeah, and you know, that's one of those things that we would recommend: test, 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 test. You know, don't just make a decision and go with it, because it can really affect your revenue. And so we would recommend, you know, if you decide that you want to get rid of a default goal, you know, test that. And the companies you're working with for your software can probably help you with that implementation. And Andy, you would know better than I would on the Blackbaud side, but you can certainly start to test certain things on your website where, you know, half of the people coming to your website to register get the default goal, another half don't get the default goal, and you can start to, you know, analyze how is that performance going. I could speak to it from results from one client that we've recently worked with, and they might be on the phone. It's the American Brain Tumor Association, and they had a default goal, and forgive me, I'm trying to remember what that default goal was, but it was based on the number of brain tumors that there are, right? So it was, you know, whether it was 210 or 211, that's what they were setting as the default goal. And they did test removing that, and they found that people were setting higher goals and reaching their goals more than when they had that default goal. And they made a lot of changes to the program, and so it's hard to say that those things, you know, are you know, make this change and you get to this result. But again, you know, I think it's important to test different things and see what works for your organization. You know, you might find that setting a higher default goal actually works better. You get a lot more people raising more money. you know, they're a little bit more committed, or they're working hard to raise a goal. It really depends. Or you might find that if lowering your goal would help your organization. I think it's just one of those things that you have to play with.
Yep, that's really good feedback.
There needs to be a balance between the entry, if you have some kind of entry fee versus no entry fee, and then how that goal works. So every organization may find it a little different, but Lynn's absolutely right. You got to test that kind of stuff.
Great feedback. Yeah, I fall in that exact same camp. Test. It's the only way to really understand what's going on in your specific supporter base and your fundraiser and participant base as well. I wonder if you have an experience here. The question that's come in is around switching from a minimum fundraising goal to a minimum number of pledges, or I guess you could extrapolate that to donations. And in this case, revenue dropped. Is there a balance that could be struck there, or do you have experience kind of comparing dollars versus the numbers of donations?
Yeah, that's an interesting thought, and I haven't seen it in the data where they've made that change and done an analysis on it, where you're looking at pledges versus goal. I think the one thing I would say is, you know, you'd really need to, if you're going to do that, you know, you're going to really need to evaluate your fulfillment communication strategy.
Yeah.
You know, because, you know, setting a goal is one thing, but if you're, you know, saying, you're saying, you know, I'm going to get, you know, 5 people to make a gift, you know, you're really going to want to have a different communication strategy to making sure that those people can fulfill those pledges, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So what does that look like? You know, is that fundraiser going to give you the names and addresses of the people that, you know, pledged or that they were going to go after? Can you communicate directly with them to get that pledge fulfillment? So just, you know, something to think about.
I was going to say, and that's an excellent opportunity where you can use some of these life cycle segmentations to, maybe that doesn't go out to the full file or to new participants, but maybe your multi-year participants, that might make a lot of sense because they're already committed to the organization and they've shown a willingness to support it. So that kind of challenge may not scare off folks.
That's a great point, and that life cycle evaluation, I think, can be really powerful as we think about what to say to these different groups of people. So that was a learning experience for me, which I found really interesting, and I think a lot of organizations could benefit from that type of analysis. The next one, I think, piggybacks kind of on our test theme, but let's say you've tested and you've got kind of a negative trend, and you've implemented an action plan and it doesn't work. What do you do then?
Bill, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. You know, there is no bad test. Part of that is if you're able to retain your job, by the way, right. If you were the one that actually thought of that. But what we learn from every test that we try, and so that may be an opportunity to go back to the way it was done previously. There might be some other reason that might be playing into why it didn't work. So you got to look statistically at, okay, was that directly correlated to the actions that we took, or is there something else going on? And that can be, for example, one large gift coming in from one side or the other can sometimes skew things. So you want to make sure you're looking at whatever your metric is, that you're looking at those metrics appropriately. But the other thing, it's an opportunity to try some different things or actually talk to the people and gain some qualitative insight as well, because there might be something you hadn't thought of that is affecting the results of your test. But pat yourself on the back. Don't be sad. But it does encourage us to do something else.
Exactly. We touched on this a little bit earlier, a couple times in passing, actually. And one of the folks on the phone wants to dive a little bit deeper into insight you have on charging an entry fee versus not charging an entry fee. You know, what is your experience there? And are there certain types of programs or events that are better suited to having an entry fee or not having an entry fee?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, I was at the peer-to-peer conference, in February in Orlando, I think it was. And it's always a big topic of discussion, and I think there's some very distinct camps on both sides as far as you should not charge an entry fee or you should charge an entry fee. The thing that I think is interesting, especially with some of this data that we looked at today, is that this is an event and it's a walk, and it's an animal organization. So it's, you know, you bring your dog and go for a walk, right? Which is super fun, but we saw that 50%, right, that the file is raising or not contributing at all, or raising less than $50. So, you know, I mean, what's the cost to put on the event? And all of those people that are not making any contribution, you know, maybe the question is, do they at some point in the future? Or do they just, you know, do they come back to the event next year, and does their actions change? Do they all of a sudden start to raise money or make a self-donation? Or perhaps they went to the event, they didn't do anything, they had a great time, and then mail you in a check, you know, 6 weeks later, and you get this white mail, this piece of mail that you have no idea, right, how that came in. So I think that when you're making a decision about entry fee versus no entry fee, you need to really look at the data and see, you know, what are we talking about? How many people are not raising any money? What's the investment cost into those people? Mm-hmm. Are we able to convert those people at a later time, you know, 6 months down the road, a year down the road, so that we're not really losing money on those people? I mean, just some things to think about.
And if I may, Lynn, is part of that is, what's the overall objective? Is it a community building activity where you just want to get name awareness, or is it a fundraising group? Now we always fall into the side of, hey, let's raise money, but your board might say, hey, this event is just for goodwill creation out the community and getting media attention. So there's different objectives, and those have to obviously play when you're looking at your metrics.
Great point.
That is a great point. And I would just extend, as part of a white paper that a couple of my teammates just published on peer-to-peer fundraising fallacies, Amy Braderman and Shayna Masterson found that participants in your events at an alarming rate, as much as 60%, don't know they were supposed to fundraise. So as you think about a registration fee versus a non-registration fee, what are you subsequently asking them to do? As Bill pointed out, are you asking them to be an engine of awareness builder, or are you asking them to be a fundraiser in addition to any registration fee? So, a thoughtful consideration of what you're asking is really important. I'm going to slide one more question, and we have just a sliver of time, but you talked about benchmarks and comparing to your own numbers. Should you set a goal for the percent of participants that fundraise? Should you compare those to benchmarks, or are there other averages that you tend to look at? I think that's an important one. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we use both. We use the Blackbaud benchmarks as well as your own event benchmarks, which is why we always like to look at, you know, a minimum of 3 years worth of data, because we'd like to see, you know, what's the highest that you were able to achieve. You know, and maybe you're achieving better than the national average, but you've seen a decline over the last couple of years. And so so we always do recommend, and that's part of kind of the key performance indicators, is once you kind of establish what are the things we're going to look at, and then you're going to start to really set some goals and say, okay, we want to move retention rate from this to this, and that estimate has to be reasonable, right? You know, don't set a goal where you're going to, you know, double your retention rate. It's just not realistic. But can you move the needle by 5 or 10%? Because it's something that you had reached that level in the past. And so that's why I think when you're making those decisions, You've got to determine what's realistic for your organization, how your organization is performing over the last couple of years, and then where are the industry benchmarks. And if you're not close to those industry benchmarks, then, think about, is there a reason why, your organization may be different, and how do you bring that up to benchmarks?
Great point. I'm pretty sure we can continue this conversation for a while, but we've reached the top of the hour and actually gone a little bit past. And Lynn and Bill, for the data geeks on the phone, and even those who have a little bit of an aversion to numbers and analytics, it's been a really eye-opening session with a lot of great content to hopefully affect how we look at our events and how we begin to look at the different groups of participants. So I thank you very much for shedding some light on the data and how to look at it and how to slice it. We really appreciate your insight today.
You're welcome. It's our pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks. And for those of you on the phone, you've made it through. We've had a very full day of peer-to-peer insights and analytics and creativity, and we hope that you've been able to come away with different things that you can take back to your organization and maybe implement right away, and maybe think about implementing as you're doing some longer range planning for events that may be in the fall or even next spring. A ton of great content, all recorded, and will all be available for you on the peertopeerworld.com website shortly. So check back. And again, thank you all for your time and attention today. Have a great day, everyone, and we look forward to speaking with you again very soon. Thanks, everyone.